Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Fastlane. I'm Denise Papier. I'm going to be delivering the seminar today on Effortless Mobility Express Deployment. You should be all unmuted at the moment. If you've got any questions at all, please put them in the Q&A. We have a few of us who are panelists who will answer any of the questions for you. In this seminar, we're going to be talking about what is the Cisco Mobility Express, how to set it up in 5 minutes, understanding the Mobility Express controller web interface, and lastly, looking at how to maintain it. So starting off with the introduction to Cisco Mobility Express. Cisco Mobility Express allows us to take an access point from the 1800 series, the 1830 and the 1850, and enable it as a virtual wireless LAN controller. In fact, as far as the access point is concerned...
Denise?
Yeah?
Sorry to stop you there. Could we just get a thumbs up or a message in the chat window just to ensure that you're able to actually hear the questions? Just want to check just to make sure that everyone can hear with any problems.
Okay. Can we have a thumbs up to just make sure that everyone can go through and hear us? There isn't any issues. Thumbs up. Yep. Everyone can hear us?
Okay, no, that's fine. I was just checking.
Okay. I'll start again then. Right, so our access point being the 1800 series can be the 1830 or the 1850 that can act as a wireless LAN control. In fact, as far as the access point is concerned, it's dual role. It can service clients and at the same time can act as your wireless LAN controller. The 1830 and the 1850 are one of Cisco's latest releases and supports the latest new Wave 2 technology of 802.11 AC, offering faster Wi-Fi to your end users. Although only the 1800 series can go through and act as a virtual wireless LAN controller, any of the second generation access points can boot up, do a hunt and discovery, and find the virtual wireless LAN controller and connect to it. In fact, when you go through and buy, or shall we say receive, unpack it, of the 1800 series, it's only going to take you about 10 minutes to go through and set it up. Cisco have made it nice and easy to take an access point out of the box, be able to boot it up and configure it as a wireless LAN controller. There's no price premium for it either. As far as these access points are concerned, you will buy them in the normal way. There is no extra cost for turning these access points into a wireless LAN controller. In fact, while this solution can support up to 25 access points with no additional licensing whatsoever. So it's not like you're going to have to go, not like when you go through and buy a 2500 wireless LAN controller and you've got to get it with a minimum of 5 license and then add on as and when you need more access points. When you purchase the 1800 and you turn them into a virtual wireless LAN controller, automatically up to 25 access points can go through and connect to them. Just be aware of the software release number that it's supported from. Cisco Mobility Express is supported from 8.1121. Okay, so you know what? Show sysinfo. Make sure you've got the latest version, and then you'll be able to go through and turn it into a virtual wireless LAN controller. Not only that, if you've got Cisco Prime infrastructure of 301 and later, you can manage the wireless solution from within Prime. If you want to do presence analytics, it's supported with CMX 10.2 and later. Plus, it supports AAA using 802.1x authentication, which can link up to a Radius server, as long as your Radius server, being the Identity Service Engine, is 1.4 or later. So, what else does it go through and support? As I said, the maximum amount of APs that you can have within the Mobility Express solution is no more than 25, with a maximum of 500 clients. It supports all the RF management, so radio resource management, selecting the right channel, being able to go through and select the power. It has advanced security, so not only can it go through and point to an external radio server, but the local box, being the wireless LAN controller, can also act as a local radio server. You do need to go through, though, and use a third-party DHCP server. As soon as you go through and set it up, Cisco automatically turn on their best practices. The only thing you need to be aware of, that it is layer 2 only. Okay, so all the APs need to be in the same subnet in order to do a hunt and discovery to find the controller. Plus, for roaming, it only supports layer 2. It can detect up to 100 rogue devices or rogue AP devices. Switched on by default is application visibility and control. It supports local guest access. And with the local guest access, you can write ACLs, which therefore, in which its terminology is a firewall to control whom has access where. Turned on by default is device profiling. That's part of the best practices. You can go out and download on your Android or your Apple device the mobile app. The mobile app can be used not only for installation but also for management. It has high availability. In other words, you should really have 2 1800 series APs as part of your solution. The idea is one goes down, the other one automatically takes over. And I've got a few slides on that a bit later on. So the idea is anyone who wants to go through and do an autonomous mode refresh, where they've got autonomous access points, can go through and use the 1800 solution. Remote offices that would like a local controller and need no more than 25 APs. Small, medium businesses which want local controllers with no more than 25 APs. This is an ideal solution. And then later on, if they decide, oh, actually, we've grown, we no longer want a local wireless LAN controller, or we've exceeded the 25 access points, then all your access points can just act as a local access point, and then hunt and discovery for a controller, a dedicated controller that you have purchased, like the 2500 or the 5500 series, for example. So how easy is it really to go through and set up? Okay. Well, first thing you need to be aware of, if you've got multiple 1800 APs, only one of them can act as the wireless LAN controller. And that particular AP that's selected will act as the master and will manage and control all the other APs. Another 1800 AP that potentially could go through and be a wireless LAN controller is known as a subordinate AP. And any other capable CAP-WAP AP will be a subordinate AP where they will all boot up Hunt and Discovery through a layer 2 broadcast and find the master controller. So the quite nice thing about this is you don't have to give up some of your older APs. They can still be used and work with and connect to an 1800 master AP. This is what the wireless app looks like. Go on to the App Store for Android or Apple, and you can then go through and download the Cisco wireless app. Actually, it's absolutely brilliant. I love it. You know, you can provision your AP. So literally, you can boot up your 1800 series and from your app, go through and configure it. What I like about it as well is the fact that you can monitor the solution as well as do some basic troubleshooting in there. Okay. If you haven't got it installed already, go and install it. It's not just for the Mobility Express. It works with any of your enterprise wireless solution that you may want to go through and use. 1800 access points. Okay, this is showing you what one of them looks like. And as you can see, we have various ports at the back of them. Okay, so as far as the ports are concerned, you've got a mode button that can be going through and used for reset. Console, so you don't have to go through and configure it from a GUI or from an app. You can actually console into the box. The other nice thing about console is that you can go under the bonnet. So anyone that's used to going through and using the command line on your wireless LAN controller, like your 2500, you still have that available to you in your 1800. In fact, you can SSH or Telnet to it once it's actually been configured. The USB is not currently supported. Okay, you've got power over Ethernet. Fair enough. Okay, that's your link that's going to go through and be able to configure an IP address for management and being able to go through either statically or dynamically to go through and configure it. Now, the auxiliary port, okay, it says here is not currently supported. Okay, well, on the 1830, it's right, it's not currently supported. But on the 1850, you can use the auxiliary port with power over Ethernet and use link aggregation. So you can lag the ports only on the 1850. The 1830 does not support link aggregation. In fact, the differences between the 1830 and the 1850 is, do you want to use link aggregation? If the answer is no, and is always going to be no, then you can just go for the 1830. So how do we go through and set this up? Okay, make sure you're aware of the prerequisites. There cannot be any other Cisco wireless LAN controller that is reachable on the network. Okay. The Mobility Express controller cannot interoperate or even coexist with other wireless LAN controllers. And the reason behind that is because when the 1800 series boots up, it is a normal AP boot up where it does a hunt and discovery for a wireless LAN controller. If it cannot find one, then it will decide, okay, I'm therefore going to be a virtual wireless LAN controller. So you cannot have, and it cannot interoperate with any other wireless LAN controllers within the same network. Therefore, because of that, you need to decide on which AP will become the virtual wireless LAN controller, and that is the one that you need to set up first. That AP must support the Cisco Mobility Express wireless control functionality, which is basically software-based. Plus, you need to ensure that there is a DHCP server present. The Mobility Express AP cannot be or shall we say the Mobility Express controller cannot be a DHCP server at all. And in fact, when this AP boots up, the first thing it has to do is get an IP address. And that IP address is going to be used for AP servicing of clients. In fact, that IP address, even though it's a virtual wireless LAN controller, that IP address is still used to connect to the virtual wireless LAN controller. Then, as well as that, that IP address will also then be used as management. You can configure a static IP address later. Okay. Once it's got an IP address, you can then go through and do an initial setup, either via the console, but this is meant to be ease. So therefore, because of that, it's got to be done over the wizard. It's got to be done via the wizard over Wi-Fi, either via a local PC or by going through and using the app. So day one, you've just got your new 1800 AP. You've opened it up. You've connected it to the Power over Ethernet switch. You have a DHCP server on your network. Immediately, the AP will boot up. It will load its image. The AP portion of it gets an IP address from the DHCP server, and then we'll go through and do a hunt and discovery for another wireless LAN controller to join. Assuming it doesn't find one, okay, it will then assume the role of the virtual wireless LAN controller. It then will go through and start the controller function, and the internal AP of that virtual wireless LAN controller will join the controller. And then something else happens, because at the end of the day, you're meant to be doing this you're meant to be configuring this over the air. You know, it's ease of configuration. So as soon as it boots up and the virtual wireless LAN controller function, an SSID is automatically created called the Cisco Air Provisioning. And this is going to be advertised out over the 2.4 gigahertz only. And then you, with a client of some type, either the app or a laptop or a desktop, will open their browser, will go through and connect to the Cisco Air Provisioning SSID. The virtual wireless LAN controller, at initial setup, will automatically be configured with a static IP address of 192.168.1.1. And just during setup, we'll have an internal DHCP server, so that when the client connects to the Cisco Air Provisioning SSID on the 2.4 gigahertz only, it will automatically get an IP address from the 192.168.1 range. You can then open up your app or your browser, and from there, the wizard will then be launched, ready for you to go through and do the configuration. And this is what it looks like. Basically, you're going to connect to the Cisco Air Provisioning SSID on the 2.4 gigahertz. The default password is password. The virtual wireless LAN controller will give you an IP address of 192.168.1.x. You will either open the app or the browser, and at that point, the first thing it will ask you to do is create an admin account. If you're opening a browser, then point it via HTTP to 192.168.1.1, where the wizard will be launched. And as I said, the first thing it will do is prompt you to put in the admin account or create an admin account. And then it literally will go through and ask you, what do you want to call the box? Date and time, do you want to go through and point to an NTP server? It will ask you to go through and create your first wireless LAN. It will ask you how you want to optimize the RF parameters. It will then confirm your settings and then finally reboot as a controller. All right. Okay, you can also put in here a static address if you want to. And then Cisco's best practices will be enabled by default. As soon as this AP reboots itself with the controller configuration, it's up and running. All the other APs at layer 2 on the same subnetwork as this virtual wireless LAN controller will do hunt and discovery and connect to this virtual wireless LAN controller. Remembering the maximum you can have is 25 and no extra licensing to go through and purchase. Okay, but how do you know you've got the right image? Or what do you do if you haven't got the right image? So, yes, it's all our APs support CAT-WAP. That's the only way they're going to be connecting to the Mobility Express. But what mode is it actually in? Okay, so best thing to do is do a show version and check that you have the correct version, number one. If you have not got a C on the software, then it's just shipping with a CAT-WAP image and it is not Mobility Express capable. If it ships with a C, it is Mobility Express capable. In fact, the AP internally is still using CAT-WAP, and then the virtual wireless LAN controller is using the Mobility Express image to turn it into that controller. When you do a show version, okay, you want it to say basically Mobility Express image, great, and it is Mobility Express capable. What you don't want to say is Mobility Express image and it's not Mobility Express capable. What this basically means is you've got the correct image, you've got the one with the C on it, but you've turned off the fact it can be Mobility Express capable. Maybe because you've turned it into a normal lightweight access point where it's going to do a hunt and discovery for a wireless LAN controller because you've now migrated to a 2500 or a 5500. Or maybe because this is the 1830 and you can't lag with it, you don't want it at all to be potentially a virtual wireless LAN controller. So in fact, there is a command that allows you to turn it off. Okay. So in the first example, case 1, okay, it's not Mobility Express capable. So you'll need to go through and download the correct code from Cisco. From the command line of the AP, you type this command in, point to the IP address of the TFTP server together with the image name. We can then convert it. In the next example, we can see that it has the Mobility Express image, but it says it's not capable. So we need to do a conversion. And funny enough, the conversion is exactly the same command as before. Okay? But on the fly, it just does a conversion. It will not and does not download any code. You just input the command. It says, I already have the correct code, reboots, and it will then be, when you do the show ver command, it will then go through and say it's Mobility Express image and that it is now capable. So potentially this AP could be elected as a virtual wireless LAN controller if you have more than one within the mobility solution. What happens if it is Mobility Express capable and you no longer want to use this solution, you've exceeded the amount of access points, or you've decided that you require for the business a centralized solution, so therefore you need to migrate to a 25 or a 5500. All you need to do is put one command in, AP type catwap, and then it will automatically convert. In fact, it just reboots, does a hunt and discovery for the controller, and then once it finds one, we'll go through and connect. Obviously, the second case, you don't need to do absolutely anything because it is not Mobility Express capable. And the third case, you don't need to do anything. It is a catwap AP because it does not support the Mobility Express image. You haven't migrated that AP for that particular image, and therefore there's nothing further to go through and do. If you have the solution up and running and you want to convert all your APs to type catwap simultaneously, okay, then you would go on to the switch, and from there just put in one command to go through and turn them into a catwap AP. So we have our virtual wireless LAN controllers up and running. We've got the 1850, let's say, elected as a virtual wireless LAN controller. You have your 1830s booted up and acting as an AP. But you may have other series APs within the Mobility Express network. So how do we add them? You need to make sure that you have the Mobility Express code. Okay? So on the Cisco website, you need to make sure that you download to a TFTP server either the Air AP 1850 or the 1830 zip file. Okay? You then need to unzip it on the TFTP server to get all of the individual AP images that will actually be supported. Then you need to go back to the virtual wireless LAN controller. Okay. And within there is a section that allows you to point to the TFTP server. When you want to add another AP to the Mobility Express network, the AP boots up, does a hunt and discovery for the wireless LAN controller, finds the virtual wireless LAN controller, then gets the new code. Okay, so it goes through the virtual wireless LAN controller that's pointing to the TFTP server that has the appropriate code for your access point. Your AP downloads the code, reboots, and then connects back to the wireless LAN controller. So e.g., you've got a 1700 AP, the 700, the 25, 26, 27, 2800 AP, 35, 36, 37, 3800 AP. Okay. Any AP that can go through and support the Mobility Express software will be able to connect and download the software and connect to the virtual wireless LAN controller, allowing you to utilize any of your other non-1800 APs. In fact, if you've got a series of APs, you really just need to go through and buy recommended two, either an 1850 or an 1830 AP, and just set them up as a controller. Okay, with two of them, they don't have to go through and support the same. Okay, so that you don't have to have two 1850s or two 1830s. You can have one 1850 and you can have one 1830. And they will still go through and work together. As I said, the 1850 you can lag, but the 1830 you can't. That's the main difference between them. So summarizing what I've said, the catwap AP will start with the catwap discovery, does a hunt and discovery for the controller. The master AP will respond to the discovery and then we'll go through the process of joining the controller as a normal LAP CAP-WAP AP. If the AP is already running the same version as the Cisco Mobility Express virtual controller, it will join the network. If it's running a different image, it will download it through the Cisco Mobility Express virtual wireless LAN controller that is pointing to the TFTP server. That's how easy it is. And Cisco aren't joking when they say you can set it up in 10 minutes. You literally unpack it, boot it up, assuming it's got the right image, you've ordered it with the right image, can't find another controller, itself will turn into a controller, be allocated the address of 192.168.1.1. You can browse to that controller, you can then go through and connect to the SSID, browse to the controller, run the setup wizard within a few minutes, it reboots, and is then the virtual wireless LAN controller. All of the other APs will then connect to the virtual wireless LAN controller. If they're the same code, it's working. If it's a different code, as long as you've downloaded the code onto a TFTP server and are pointing the virtual wireless LAN controller at the TFTP server, all will be running. You've now got a wireless LAN controller set up in the Mobility Express solution, where your clients can then connect to any of the 25 APs that you might be using. Let's look a little bit closely at the controller web interface. So if you remember, on the initial setup of the wizard, it asks you to create an admin account. You're now going to browse to the controller via HTTPS, or you can use your new little app if you prefer, and log in with the admin account, username and password that you set up during the Wireless LAN Express setup wizard. You're then taken to the home page. Now, by default, on day 0, all Cisco's best practices are enabled by default. Okay. And one of the things that you can do is go and have a look at those best practices and see whether you agree with them or not. Any of the ones that are not set, you can click on them and expand it, give you a brief little summary, and then you can then click to the relevant page. E.g., you put in a manual time instead of setting up the NTP server. Well, it will then allow you to go through and link to the NTP server. But things like AVC is set up by default, application visibility and control. Profiling is set up by default. Band select is set up by default. So you can, have a quick look about the best practices, but the idea is out of the box, it is ready to run. Also gives you a nice network summary, so you can see how many access points are connected, both on the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz. You can look at, if you want to, the top applications that are actually being used and a list of those applications. You can look at the operating systems that are being used by the client. You can look at the type of clients that are being used. Why? Because AVC and profiling is switched on by default. These are all widgets, so you can add, you can remove, you can change what you are seeing on the home screen, as we call it, the monitoring screen. When you're looking at the access points, you can basically just jump into your access points. You can have a look at the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz. You can see how long it's been up for, what the usage is of that access point, what the radio performance is of that access point, what clients are connected to that access point. We've also now got a bit of troubleshooting built in. You've got some extra tools available to you that you can go through and use, like restarting the AP, clearing all the config. You have a network sniffer built in, so you can start capturing packets if you want to from this access point. Monitoring clients is really nice. Click on your clients. Yes, you can get the full detail about the clients, the IP address, what radio they are going through and using, what access point they're connected to, what applications they are going through and using. Okay. But also, it gives you a little help wizard of showing how that connection went through. So, for example, if authentication failed, it will show you at which point it's failed. You know, or if they can't connect to the web network, you can see here that it's authentication that's failed, or they're authenticated. You can see here that maybe they can't go through and get an IP address. You can look at the network status and the quad status, how they were authenticated. And we can do a little test, it's a ping test for connectivity. So it checks that the client has connected correctly. You know, especially if a client phones up and says, oh, it's not working, it's really slow. You can have a quick look and see what's going on. Obviously, one of the things that you're going to have to do is create wireless LAN. You do get, when you go through the setup wizard, you will be able to create a wireless LAN at this point. But there might be more wireless LANs that you want to go through and create. The maximum wireless LAN count that is supported through the GUI is 16. From the command line, you can actually add more in if you want to, but from the GUI, it's a maximum of 16. It supports all the different security types, whether you want open, whether you're using WPA2 with pre-shared keys, whether you're using WPA2 with enterprise, or whether you want to use the guest network. The wireless LANs allow you to do VLAN mapping. The wireless LANs allow you to go through and create access control rules. So you literally create a new wireless LAN, and you can see here from the little menu here, you'll give it the usual profile name, the SSID, whether it's enabled or disabled, what radio you wish it to be bound to, what type of security you want it to use, and then if it's using WPA2 with pre-shared keys, being able to enter the pre-shared key. You then can go through into VLAN and firewall and set up your parameters. You then have quads to go through and set up your parameters. Remembering things like AVC, profiling, band select are all enabled by default. You'll be able to click as well on each of your APs and go through and manage them. On the AP that is the master, and this is what the master icon looks like, it's got a little P on it. You'll be able to have the submenu controller. On the devices that are not the master, you can only have one master within the Mobility Express solution. They are known as subordinate APs, and obviously you won't have the controller menu on there. But it's on the controller menu that you can change the management IP address. It's on the controller's menu that you can change the country code if you wish to. Other than that, it's like configuring an access point. So you can give it, a static or a dynamic IP address for the access point. You can go through and change the name and put in a location. Other than that, things like the operating mode is done and elected dynamically, whether it's a master or subordinate. Okay, and the other fields are received from the controller, so the controller you'll be able to change the radio settings that the APs will automatically go through and inherit. Management, you can enable whatever you want. HTTP or Telnet, obviously they're not very secure and not recommended. So HTTPS and SSH are enabled by default, and HTTP and Telnet are disabled by default, but you can go through and swap that around if you want to. But what happens? Okay, so actually the GUI is really easy to configure. The GUI is really user friendly to be able to visualize on what's happening on your network, clients are connected, the types of applications they are going through and using, the devices that they are going through and using, the access points that are connected to your network, easily being able to go through and create your wireless LANs, being able to point either to the virtual wireless LAN controller as a radius server or pointing to an external radius server. But in order for RRM to work, in order to manage your access points, then you really need to ensure that there is a master within your solution. So for redundancy, it's better to have two 1800 APs, where when one goes down, the other one will automatically fail over. So we have what's known as an election process. It is only the 1800 with the software Mobility Express capable that will participate in the master election to become the wireless LAN controller. When the master goes down, one of the other 1800 APs will automatically take over the role. It's a virtual wireless LAN controller. It has a virtual IP address. And the 1800 series that is potentially could become a Mobility Express master, so is Mobility Express capable, will sync with the master. So if you've got one master that's an 1852 and three 1832s that are Mobility Express capable, they will sync the configuration and IP address with the master, so that when the master goes down, one of the other APs will be elected and will take on board the same virtual IP address. Master election and client connectivity is restored in less than 3 minutes. Please be aware it is not stateful. Okay, there's no stateful switchover. Okay. In fact, one of the things we haven't yet said is when the APs boot up and they connect to the controller, the virtual wireless LAN controller, what you don't see in the back end is actually they're becoming flex APs. Okay. So they actually switch the data locally. That's number one. And number two is, as long as the client is still connected to one of those local APs, they will remain connected even while the virtual wireless LAN controller switches over. It just doesn't allow any new connections to go through and take place. And that's why it says standalone mode is currently not supported on the 1800 APs. You know, there needs to be a controller up and running in order to manage all of the APs. Okay? And in fact, when the 1800, when the master AP goes down, the 1800 still allows clients to be connected. Okay, will still service existing clients, as will any of the other access points that you are using. Okay. So it looks at the most capable access point. 1850 will always win over the 1830. If they are both the same type of device, then it's least client load. Okay. And then if it's still equal, it's just lowest MAC address that's going to win. But there always needs to be one, and again, there can only be one master. Plus, your Mobility Express solution can interoperate with the Identity Service Engine. So we can do 802.1x authentication locally, or we can do it externally. For centralized management, it supports Prime. So if you have a number of remote locations that are using Mobility Express and want to centrally go through and manage them all, then it's Prime 3.0 patched with 1.0. Supported is also Connected Mobile Experience. CMX allows you to see number of hosts that are in a particular area. Really popular on things like retail stores, for example. They want to know how many people are coming through their shops. So connecting your Mobility Express APs to a present CMX solution, it can go through and do a count. And then within the CMX, you can then go through and do analytics. So, the retail shop, for example, can say, well, how many people came in at Tuesday between 12 and 1 compared to last Tuesday to 12 and 1? Presence is count. Okay, count on MAC addresses. How many devices do the access point see is reported through the controller to the Connected Mobile Experience. CMX is software that runs on the Mobility Service Engine platform. And then once it's gathering information, you can then run all different types of analytic reports. As long as it's CMX 10.2, then your Mobility Express solution can interoperate. So you can use your older access points. You just need a minimum really for redundancy and high availability of 2 1800 access points, where one of them will become a master. And then optionally, you can use other Cisco tools, such as ICE, CMX, and PI, to go through and manage the solution. Okay. That's the end of the Mobility Express. I hope you have enjoyed it. It's a really, really good solution, for small, medium businesses, for anyone who is migrating from an autonomous to a controller solution. It's another good one to go through and use. I hope this has given you the tools to go out and set up the Mobility Express. And if you want to take it further, we do go through and have a Cisco Mobility Express self-drive workshop, which goes into a lot more detail than what we've covered in the last hour. Plus, you get a half-day hands-on on installing and configuring and working with ICE Prime CMX for the Mobility Express solution. There might be other wireless classes you're interested in, like the CCNA Wireless, the Wi-Fi Fundamental. There's a new CCNP Wireless that's just been released that covers design, security, deployment, and troubleshooting. And then we have other product training, like going through Prime for wired and wireless using NMENPI, or just deploying CMX if you're interested, which is 2 days. You will get a link to the recording, so you can review it again in your own time. Okay, let me just see if there's any questions that haven't been answered. No, I think all of them have been answered. I'll stay on for a few more minutes if anyone wants to pop any more questions in the Q&A. Otherwise, I'd like to say thank you for your time. It's really appreciated for you coming on board and taking the time to listen. Thank you.